So my interest in Eastern philosophies and other philosophies really it kind of stems from trying to make sense of life, the complexity of life in modernity, and from asking how I can kind of skillfully navigate a world which I experience as kind of full of noise. So my interest is not academic, say in the way a historian or a philologist would approach things. I'm only in this kind of brief chat, and I'll take maybe 15, 20 minutes or so. And if it gets boring before that, you can ask me to shut up. I'm only really sharing my perspective from kind of having engaged with these ideas over the years. And Kevin, I'm sure, will cringe at my pronunciation of certain Chinese words. I'm sure, Kevin, maybe we'll have to have some lessons on the side later, yeah, so you may have to excuse my bad pronunciation at the Mandarin Club. So Buddhism and its different schools. So the talk is obviously called, Chuang Tzu or Alan Watts' perspectives on Eastern philosophy, and I may be covering too much here, but let's have a go. So Buddhism and its different schools, of which Chan, which is or Chinese Zen is one, is what might be referred to as a way of liberation, along with other traditions like Taoism and the Indian Vedanta. So these ways of liberation, as we call them, are fundamentally different to dualistic theisms. And how are they different? So monotheisms are dualistic in the sense that they typically, almost inevitably, in some shape or form, they're characterized by a battle between light and dark, between good and evil. And this is something that goes all the way back to Zoroastrianism in Persia, and in less stringent forms, further back to civilizations such as ancient Egypt. For example, you have the struggles between Seth and Horus. So that's kind of the dualism that you find, a bit the battle between light and dark, which you see in many theisms. So liberation or moksha, so moksha is a Sanskrit word for liberation, is from what? The question, the liberation, what is it from? And it's from what is referred to as Maya or illusion. And this kind of liberation from Maya is a common theme in Indian and Eastern philosophical traditions. So what is Maya? Maya is the web of arbitrary distinctions and delineations, narratives and symbols that we humans create to categorize and observe the world. So these are delineations which really don't actually exist in nature, even though we'd like to think so. So the delineations, the Maya, according to many sort of philosophical traditions, can become a source of frustration when we don't realize that they are merely arbitrary conventions or mental abstractions that we project onto the world to try and understand it. So liberation is about seeing through Maya, and not just intellectually, but experiencing it, so to speak, in your bones. And I view all of these ways of liberation, whether Taoist, Buddhist, Vedantic, as kind of pointing to the same thing. They point to an inner experience of relating to and being in the world, and an experience that's really rooted in recognizing the non-dual nature of all phenomena, in an experience that is, in a sense, beyond good and evil, beyond right and wrong. Of course, each way of liberation will have its own flavor in how it tries to enable this insight or this feeling. The goal, however, in the way that I see it and I experience these different ways, is the same. So one of the key features of philosophies of liberation is arriving at the truth by negating or excluding what is not the truth. So this kind of via negativa approach is not just exclusive to Eastern philosophical traditions. You also find it in certain theological traditions, such as the apophatic Christian tradition of Saint Dionysius the Areopagite from around the 1st century. And Saint Dionysius, emphasizes really a union with God by removing all that is not God. So through agnosia, which basically means through unknowing. So it's not something that is sort of, let's say, peculiarly Eastern, but is found in other traditions. And I suspect actually also through Sufism, although I'm not very familiar with that, so I am not going to go into that because it's not an area of my knowledge. Although I do suspect a similar thrust. So moving on to Taoism, Taoist ideas, obviously China, have probably been around since at least the 5th and 6th centuries BC. And the central theme of Taoism is one of naturalness, being in accord with nature, what they commonly refer to as flowing with the Tao. And the Tao itself is undefinable, though it's sometimes referred to as the absolute or the ultimate reality as a kind of shorthand, even though it itself is beyond words. So Alan Watts, whose name is in the title, is a 20th century philosopher and teacher of liberation, and someone whose work I found tremendously powerful, direct, accessible, and insightful. And here's a little description of the Tao, and I'm going to try the screen share now and see if I can share that with you. Hold on. Only host. Oops. Apologies. Here we go. And there you go. Can you guys all see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. So this is Alan Watts trying to describe the Tao. So it must be clear from the start that Tao cannot be understood as God in the sense of the ruler, monarch, commander, architect, and maker of the universe. The image of the military and political overlord or of a creator external to nature has no place in the idea of Tao. The Tao is the ultimate reality and energy of the universe, the ground of being and non-being. Let me try to come back to this. So that's how Watts sees it. And in this last phrase, the ground of being and non-being, this points to the non-duality that I mentioned before. So kind of the intention to see beyond light and dark, right and wrong. Hence the phrase, the ground of being and non-being, rather than just saying the ground of being or the ground of non-being. So this is a recognition of the non-dual nature of all existence. And in essence, it's about really seeing that you cannot have up without down, and you cannot have in without out, in the same way that you can't have self without other, and therefore in the same way that you can't have good without evil. So at root, it's kind of a very simple idea, yet it has profound implications. So how did the early Taoists grapple or go into this idea of non-duality? And we can kind of try and get a sense of that through Chuang Tzu, from the book of Chuang Tzu. And Chuang Tzu is estimated to have lived around the 4th century BC. People will disagree and they have different dates, but roughly the 4th century BC or so, probably a century or so after the legendary figure of Lao Tzu, who I'm sure all of you have heard of, who produced the equally legendary work, or supposed to have produced the equally legendary work of the Tao Te Ching. So Chuang Tzu, and I'll do the screen sharing again, can help us get a sense of how the Taoists grappled with non-duality. And Chuang Tzu says, compare birth with death, compare death with life. Compare what is possible with what is not possible. And compare what is not possible with what is possible. Because there is not. And because there is not, there is. So those of you who are familiar with Chinese, and I'm sure it's a Mandarin club, so I'm sure many of you are familiar in some shape or form with Chinese culture. The Chuang Tzu quote echoes really the Yin Yang principle, which was probably embedded in Chinese culture long before Chuang Tzu. I mean, I have no idea, I'm speculating, but probably was in existence because it appears in the I Ching, the Book of Changes, which people reckon has been in circulation in oral form or written down much before the time of Chuang Tzu. So the Yin Yang principle is about the interdependence of opposing forces. For example, hard and soft are mutually arising and they depend on each other. The only reason we know something is hard because softness exists. The only reason we know softness exists is because hardness exists. And they kind of depend on each other despite being, if you will, opposing poles of a spectrum. So in Chinese martial arts, for example, an extreme yang attack, which is hard and forceful, is generally almost always best diffused with extreme yin, something soft and fluid. And in fact, extreme yang against yang is very ineffective and actually can even cause injury. So this principle kind of pervades all aspects of I was going to say Chinese culture, but it's really all existence. And it manifests in different areas. So that the recognition of the relational nature of phenomena, by relational I mean the non-dual nature, is in a sense what it means to flow with the Tao. And the image of water is often used to represent the Tao. And from the Tao Te Ching, the Lao Tzu is supposed to have said, the highest good is water. For the good of water is that it nourishes everything without striving. So being like water is a big theme in the Taoist tradition, and I'm sure many of you have heard of this even in popular culture. And this whole theme of being like water manifests in the idea of Mu Wei in Taoist philosophy. Hope I'm getting the pronunciations right, Kevin. You can pinch me later if they're not good. So Mu Wei is literally translated non-action. Obviously, that's too simple, and the kind of general accepted intended meaning is more something like action without force, or action without contrivance. Action without force is something, let's say, Alan Watts is a kind of definition he would use. Action without contrivance is what sort of I would say, not being a Chinese speaker, but trying to read into the sort of philosophical intention of it. So describing how a person who embodies Mu Wei might be, Chuang Tzu again will share with us a quick thought, if I can bring it up. So describing a person who embodies naturalistic action, action without force, action without contrivance, the book of Chuang Tzu says, his forehead beams with simplicity. He is cold as the autumn and warm as the spring, for his joy and anger occur as naturally as the four seasons. So again, we see the emphasis on naturalness, on being in accord with nature. So this kind of philosophical backdrop, or way of life, if you will, Taoism, was really the backdrop against which Buddhism took root in China. But it's not just Taoism. You have to also remember that Confucianism was heavily embedded in Chinese culture at the time. So, from what we know. And a quick word on Confucianism, it's very much concerned with what I would call, or what people would call, conventional knowledge, as opposed to sort of absolute knowledge or metaphysical or knowledge or self-knowledge. And it's very much to do with rites and rituals, how to behave, codes of conduct, this and that, blah, blah, blah. So in a sense, it's very much the antithesis of the Taoist way. And in fact, there's a long sort of history of, in the book of Chuang Tzu, for example, I wouldn't call them attacks on the Confucianists, but sort of a critique of Confucianism is a kind of a running theme in Taoism, or in the text that we have. So continuing on to the emergence of Buddhism, because the talk is kind of trying to link Taoism with Buddhism, and to talk about the flavor of Chan Buddhism in China, or Chinese Zen. So the Buddhist sutras were starting to be translated to Chinese apparently around the 4th century, and Chan, or Chinese Zen, flourished during the Tang dynasty, which was roughly the 7th to the 10th centuries. So Chan is really a fusion of Taoism and Indian Buddhism, and I think it produced really a remarkable philosophy, or a philosophy of a particularly remarkable flavor. Let's put it that way. Before we get into Chan, though, I think it might be useful just to give a little bit of background on Indian Buddhism, which kind of came to China and then took root amidst this backdrop of Taoism and Confucianism. So Gautama, the Buddha, is said to have lived and taught in what is today's India and Nepal around the 5th century BC. And the philosophical traditions around at the time really had the flavor of, we might call, abstract thought. It's quite analytical, quite technical. And Buddhism also inherited some of this, at least if not in the way the Buddha taught it, or Gautama taught it, at least in the way it was passed down over the centuries. And it's said that there was 40-something competing schools of philosophical thought around Gautama's time. And analytical debates were very common among these schools, around the teachers. People would go to the school and they would throw questions, and there were sort of these debates which used to happen, or are recorded as having happened. So if Taoism is enigmatic and sort of mysterious due to its directness, perhaps because it says too little, like flow like the water or whatever, Indian Buddhism is probably at the other end of the spectrum, quite abstract and analytical. At least that's how I personally experience the two. Others may disagree. I think people will. Yeah, I think, yeah. Some may disagree, let's say, but that's how I experience it. And Indian Buddhism, there are two major schools. It's the Theravada and the Mahayana traditions. I won't go into it now. It's not enough time for that, and not really necessary for this talk. Really have much more to say about the mind and about how to approach the mind in a way that's different to, let's say, Taoism. So Indian Buddhism has a huge psychological focus to it. So the special brew that is Chan, our Chinese Zen, is a kind of sweet spot that blends the naturalness and directness of Taoism with the analytical detail of Indian Buddhism. So to give you an idea of the analytical thrust of Indian Buddhism, I want to share an extract from the Pali Canon, the Theravada Canon from the Mahasatipatthana Sutra, which is the discourse of the establishing of mindfulness. Even the name of the sutra is quite long, as you can and see. Let me bring it up. You might find it quite interesting. You guys can see this, right? It's a lot of text. Hopefully it's appearing completely on your screen. Okay, cool. So, okay, it says, and how monks does a monk abide contemplating mind as mind? Here, a monk knows a lustful mind as lustful, a mind free from lust as free from lust, a hating mind as hating, a mind free from hate as free from hate, a deluded mind as deluded, an undeluded mind as distracted, a developed mind as developed, an undeveloped mind as undeveloped, a surpassed mind as surpassed, an unsurpassed mind as unsurpassed. Actually, it goes on. I truncated it, right? I truncated it. That's hence the etc. Then it goes on to sort of, not a conclusion, but semi-conclusion. So he abides contemplating mind as mind internally. He abides contemplating mind as mind externally. He abides contemplating arising phenomena in the mind, or else mindfulness that there is mind is present just to the extent necessary for knowledge and awareness. And he abides detached, not grasping at anything in the world. I'm going to pause there just so I can gather my own breath. So that's an example of the I don't know what the right word is. Detail, analytical thrust, abstract thinking. You know, they're just words, but they give you. I mean, the words are sort of irrelevant, which is why I wanted to share the quote. That is sort of an exemplification of what some of the Indian Buddhist texts can be like. So D.T. Suzuki, who I'm sure you've heard of, is 20th century, actually 19th and 20th, Japanese scholar of many books on Zen. He believes that Chan, or Chinese Zen, could not have flourished in an abstract thinking culture such as ancient India. By the way, where also the Brahmin tradition, Brahmin is kind of priest, had a huge emphasis on monasticism and things like celibacy. And apparently the Chinese people back in the day really objected to monks depending on lay people to feed them, and also kind of objected to their celibacy because who will perform ancestral rituals. So Suzuki puts these objections down to the Chinese being, quote, eminently practical, unquote. And yeah, well, it's a perspective, and the very fact that Chan came into being in against the context of Taoism in a very different flavor to the way it emerged in India is perhaps a corroboration of what Suzuki thinks. It certainly makes sense to me, although it's a narrative, you know, like all narratives, they are bound to a certain level of falsity. So it's also interesting that Chan...
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Of course.
I think there's someone trying to get into the meeting.
All right.
Maybe two people. And well, one's just asked, another's just asked for the password.
See waiting room and admit.
Felix Tao.
I've admitted them. Done.
And another's just asked for the password. She'll be in a sec. I'm just going to send her the password.
No worries. Let me know when I should continue.
Hello?
Hey, Marianne.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I just need the password, please.
Well,
So
yeah,
sorry.
I just sent it to you on Meetup, so.
Okay, all right. So I'll connect in a minute. Bye-bye. See you in a minute. Bye.
She'll be quick. She's
Was she not already connected?
she needs to connect on a different device. I don't know what the score is, but it happens every time with her.
Should I carry on?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll mute myself again.
No worries, no worries. So where will we? Yes, so practicality. So yeah, so speaking of practicality, so Chan masters, they would, for example, frequently do hard labor with their students in a way that's kind of different to the stricter monastic hierarchies that you see in India, Sri Lanka, where I'm from, for that matter, and kind of going back to Chan. Chan means meditation, and it came into its own as a way of liberation. Interestingly, speaking of practicality, through the teachings of an illiterate son of a farmer, Huineng, who lived around the 7th century. So Indian Buddhist traditions have a significant emphasis on meditation. The word is dhyana in Sanskrit. And Gautama himself is said to have sat in meditation for several hours under a tree before his awakening to become the Buddha. And so meditation today, even today, is kind of viewed as a key to liberation. And having grown up in a culturally Theravada Buddhist setting in Sri Lanka, where meditation is heavily emphasized, I have always wondered about its kind of professed, fundamental, almost axiomatic necessity. And even Japanese Zen, which kind of developed out of Chinese Zen later, today, someone else trying to get in, okay, I'll leave that to Kevin. Even Japanese Zen today has a heavy focus on what they call zazen, or sitting meditation. And there is, I feel, this risk of elevating form above substance, sort of obsessing over the finger that points to the moon at the expense of seeing the moon. So meditation may help, and it may help some practitioners more than others, but how important is it really, fundamentally? So Chan and Zen, they take their names from the Sanskrit dhyana, which means meditation. And despite the name, Zen, Chan, which means meditation, Huineng, the literate farmer's son, warns us about the dangers of clinging to meditation. And Huineng's Chan teachings are really about direct pointing, or what they call sudden awakening. So rather than in kind of arduous meditation and slow stage-by-stage development, the focus is on what they call intuitive wisdom, which is the word is prajna, and the intuitive wisdom into what? Into the relational nature, the non-duality that we talked about before, of all things, as the primary gateway to awakening. So in fact, Huineng went to great lengths to explain that prajna, or intuitive wisdom, and dhyana, meditation, are actually one and the same. And this represented a key emphasis in Chan Buddhist thinking, in a way that's quite different to what was prevailing before in India, with this big emphasis on meditation, and sort of a more gradual process. But I think it would still be unfair to say that the seed of awakening, this sudden direct awakening, wasn't already present in Indian Buddhism. It certainly was, particularly in the Mahayana tradition. It's just that this seed of direct awakening, which is really about an internal experience, just found the perfect conditions for growth in 7th century China. So the Taoist influence of naturalness, Mu Wei, which we mentioned, also enters Chan with the idea of Mu Nen, or no mind. And Mu Nen does not refer to being like a madman that has lost, his or her faculties. Rather, it refers to the nature of the mind that is unself-conscious, that works kind of freely without the ego mind's constant interference. So through all this, Taoist influence in China brought a kind of directness to the Chinese Zen tradition. And to give you an example, when a student asked the Chinese master Matsu, what is the Tao, or what is the Tao? He replied by saying, your ordinary consciousness is the Tao. That's it. And you can contrast this with this simple statement with that long analytical text in the Theravada discourse of the establishing of mindfulness that we noted a few minutes ago. So in conclusion, as kind of a quick sum up, ways of liberation, such as Taoism, tend to emphasize the non-dual nature of all existence and in being harmony with the Tao. Indian Buddhism comes at it from slightly the other side. It focuses on the illusion of separateness born of the ego mind that seeks to dominate and control the world that it feels apart from. But both really point to the same place. They're just different flavors. They point to the falsity of separateness between the knower and the known, between subject and object, between good and evil, and ultimately between this and that. So Chan's unique flavor is in having blended these two philosophies in really a quite beautiful way, in my opinion anyway. And liberation in Chan can be sudden. It can be within immediate reach if only we allow ourselves to see how we are already in harmony with the Tao, would be the Chan teaching. So I'll close with a quote from Huineng, which speaks to this, and then we can take some questions afterwards. So to close with Huineng, he says, our nature itself remains pure. The sun and the moon are always shining. It is only due to cloud cover that there is light above, but darkness below. And we can't see the sun, moon, or stars. Then suddenly the wind of wisdom comes along and blows the clouds and drives the fog away. And a panorama of 10,000 images appears all at once. So I think I will stop there.